Hello and welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show, coming to you from The Good Source. This is the show where the left gets to find out that your and my views are more in line with mainstream Australia than they think. Regular viewers and listeners to the podcast version of this will know that I have a book out. It's called I Kid You Not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture Wars. It's been an honour to have friends in politics like Queensland Senator Amanda Stoker and my good friend Dr. Mark Robinson, the LNP member for Oodgeroo down at Cleveland in Brisbane, do the launches for me. Last weekend I flew to Cairns and several launch events were held up there and on the Atherton Tablelands. I'm so passionate about the message of this book. Probably for the first time, it lifts the curtain behind the debates which the mainstream media don't tell us about. It contains stories of leadership failure where good people chose to do nothing. And that came with disastrous consequences, usually for women and for children. The first print run sold 1,000 within weeks and sold out with the need to go to the presses and run off a second edition. And that's about halfway sold as we speak. And that's really exciting. And I've been overwhelmed by the response of so many of you. Thank you if you have purchased a copy. Please tell your friends, buy a copy for your dad on this Father's Day. Men need their spines strengthened, and this is the book to do it. I have two fantastic guests for you on today's show, and I know you're going to love both of them. Branca Vanderlinden is an old friend of mine from my Canberra days, and she heads up an advocacy group called HOPE, which is campaigning for better end-of-life outcomes than the lethal jab from a doctor turned killer under euthanasia laws. What she has to tell us today will set your hair on fire. But first, Paul Green was for many years a member of the New South Wales Upper House with the Reverend Fred Niles' Christian Democratic Party. One of Paul's greatest achievements as a parliamentarian, and there were many great achievements, was to achieve cross-party support for a bill to stamp out modern slavery. Now, I know what you're thinking. You thought that the slave trade was over when William Wilberforce abolished it in England in the early 19th century, and then decades later, the US Civil War settled it once and for all. But think again. Well, Paul joins me now. Paul, it's great to see you. Welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show.
Hey, it's great to be on, mate, and good to see you, and great to see that your book's selling, which is a good thing, I hear.
Mate, anytime you want to come on the show and plug my book, you're welcome, Paul. It's great to have you.
I recommend it, my friend.
You haven't read it yet, but I know you will.
No, that's true. That's true. I put that disclaimer that I'm not a great reader of books, but if I was going to read a book, yours would be one of the first.
That's a recommendation. That's a recommendation if ever I heard one. Paul, it's so good to have you here. You and I have been friends for many, many years, and I had the privilege of sitting briefly in the public gallery of the New South Wales Upper House. I just happened to be in Sydney the day that you were debating your bill and it was being passed through the Parliament, and that was a historic occasion. But Paul, this is what got my attention and why I was so keen to get you on the show. Last week, the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, Anthony Fisher, a great man, criticised the Berejiklian government, the Liberal government down there, for not implementing your modern slavery bill. Anthony Fisher said this to the Sydney Morning Herald. He said, "I didn't dream that a law passed by both houses of state parliament and given royal assent with wide public support and in keeping with the best of our Christian anti-slavery and secular human rights traditions would be blocked from coming into force by a democratic government." Paul, as the author of this historic bill, do you share Archbishop Fisher's disappointment?
Oh, look, absolutely share his disappointment. It's disgraceful when you think of it. I guess, Lyle, that we all elect a government to protect the people, and even more so to protect the most vulnerable. And so what you've got here, you've got a government sitting on a bill or an act now that has been honoured and signed off by the governor, and they're sitting on their hands while vulnerable people continue to be exploited either through debt bondage, sex slavery, and a whole bunch of other or slavery issues. And it's just, I think it's totally embarrassing for this government, because we know that Kevin Hyland, the former anti-slavery commissioner in the UK, said This was the world's best bill. New South Wales was leading the way, and they continue to sit on their hands.
Mate, that's fantastic. That's high praise for that bill. Look, so many people would be wondering, well, where is modern slavery occurring today? You mentioned a few areas, the sex trade. We have a legal state-sanctioned brothel industry in most states of Australia. Where is slavery in Australia operating today that requires this bill to give law enforcement the ability to go and stamp it out?
Well, look, there's various places, and I meant number one, people quite often think of human trafficking, human sex trafficking, but it's so much broader than that. It can be debt bondage, or students are brought out thinking from other Asian countries, and they think they're coming over here to study. They arrive only to be shoved in a room, passports taken from them, and they have to perform duties to pay back the air ticket. But they don't just get to pay back the air ticket. They have to pay 10, 15 times that amount. And then they find out that they're in these abusive relationships, that they can't go outside, they can't be part of the community. All the promises that they thought they were coming to Australia to complete and enjoy their life and upgrade their life, because a lot of them have come from very hard situations, find themselves locked in these rooms, either to serve economic outcomes for greedy people, or sexual outcomes for the human sex trafficking trade. There's a whole bunch of things. They could be backpackers that have been put in these businesses out the back of Australia that have a lot of fruit pickers and different things, and they're just totally exploited. Their passports are removed from them. So it's not just one. People just think this is long gone, and human trafficking and human slavery is long gone, but it's well and truly alive. So much so, Lyle, that you could fill 16,838 A380 airplanes with children that have been trafficked or in slavery alone.
Wow, that's
over 9 million children worldwide. Now, could you imagine if one plane went down, and we've seen this some time ago, that the UK Anti-Slavery Commissioner said, we had a plane go down, there was a problem with the plane, and they halted the whole brand of that particular plane because of this one issue with it. Well, This is 16,838 plane loads of kids that are ending up in slavery or trafficking. It's absolutely deplorable. And for the New South Wales state government to sit on their hands when we've been elected to protect our most vulnerable, to sit on their hands while this legislation is ready to go, ready to protect, ready to bring restoration and hope to these people that don't have a voice, is embarrassing.
It's crazy, Paul. William Wilberforce and Abraham Lincoln would be rolling in their graves right now.
St. Patrick.
Yeah. What does your bill empower the authorities to do to try and stop this problem here in our nation?
Yeah, look, the bill is built on a framework that we came through the anti-slavery or human trafficking inquiry. We had 34 recommendations from all these stakeholders that work on these sad situations day and night. These agencies like Stop the Traffic and all these anti-slavery stakeholders that do an amazing job. So we were able to build the framework for that, and some of the main points of that is with the installation of the Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Now, New South Wales did do that, not independent, but did institute that, which is fantastic. So they're going to be applauded for at least putting an anti-slavery commissioner in. We also did a lot to do with the victims' compensation scheme to actually say, well, if the criminals are literally making a lot of money, because drugs you can only sell once, but a person they sell over and over and over again. And so we're saying, if you can catch these people, freeze their assets, sell their assets, and put the money back into the victims' compensation scheme, so these victims can be restored back to a full life. Another one. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Another one was the increase in penalties for offences. So a lot of these big companies, they get a slap on the wrist if they don't make some actions to deal with, if they find slavery or slavery-like practices in their supply line. So we're just saying, if you know about this and you're trying to get a corporate advantage on the back of exploitation, we're going to fine you, and you can go to jail as a director of a company. This stuff is not happening worldwide. It was world-leading legislation. And of course, the fourth point mainly that it deals with is just slave-proofing our supply line for corporate bodies, for government bodies, for faith bodies, and civic bodies, businesses. So if we could slave-proof our supply line, we go a long way to saving a lot of people from being exploited.
I love that terminology, slave-proofing our supply line. So your bill, which is now an act of Parliament, has got real teeth and can hold corporations accountable if they have, if they're using exploited workers in a factory in Bangladesh or China or something like that. Yeah. Paul, why do you think this bill, this act, it's an act of Parliament, it was passed, why has it not been actioned by the Berejiklian government? Why is it on the go slow?
Look, probably numerous reasons. One, that the people of New South Wales didn't elect me in 2019 to go on with the job and keep on top of it. Sadly, the complications of that is there's no driver at the seat of this particular act. And so there's no accountability for the government to actually continue the momentum. Secondly, major parties don't like minor parties moving bills and eventually making law. They don't like that. But to the Premier's credit in New South Wales, she backed us and we were able to make it. But one of the ways that you can deal with things like this in a political strategy is you go, we're all with you. But we know behind the scenes, we're going to just slow this right up. It's going nowhere fast. And sadly, on this occasion, that means more people, the most vulnerable in our community, are going to be suffering or not being heard and not being saved from their place of exploitation.
Well, Paul, it's terrific that someone like Archbishop Anthony Fisher would come out and, hold the flame to the feet of Gladys Berejiklian and her coalition government there. Mate, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. But full credit to you, mate, for achieving that act of Parliament. I'm sure the public pressure that's being brought to bear will cause them to implement this, and that this will go on to do great things in terms of freeing people who are held in bondage. So, Paul, thanks so much for your time. Before you go, mate, what's Paul Green up to these days now that he's a private citizen?
Well, being a politician, let me just say, if you really want to get behind this, write to the state premier in New South Wales and say, get on with it. Secondly, in terms of as a private citizen, I am enjoying the time being with my family. I'm doing some consultancy work, and of course I would enjoy some more work if people out there have got something in line that they need some help with. We have immense experience in the political arena and of course other networks. And thirdly, just trying to do what everyone else is doing, is just get through this COVID season and what that means.
No, good on you, Paul. Well, look, all the best for what you're doing in this next chapter of your life, and give our regards to Michelle, who I know supported you so wonderfully during your many years as a parliamentarian. Thanks so much for joining us, Paul.
Good on you. Good to be with you again.
Well, welcome back to the Lyle Shelton Show. It's great to have your company again this week. My next guest is Branca Vanderlinden. She is the Executive Director, or the Director of Hope, which is a campaigning organisation that seeks to advocate for better end-of-life healthcare. And she campaigns against this trend to allow doctors to change their role to becoming killers under euthanasia legislation. And there's a lot of pressure around the nation at the moment, with Victoria having legalised it, Western Australia, Queensland looking at it, and it really is a growing pressure in our nation. But it's great to have Branca, because she's monitoring what's going on worldwide, and what she's got to tell us now will it'll set your hair on fire. Branca, welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show.
Thanks very much for having me, Lyle. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. We knew each other in my Canberra days, and talking today by Zoom. But Branca, I've watched your progress as you've taken on Hope. For those who aren't fully aware, and I gave a very inadequate explanation there, but just tell us a little bit about Hope and what it is you're campaigning for at this time.
Well, Hope is a grassroots organisation made up of members from all around Australia, some from overseas as well. we are an organisation both of individuals and of groups, and we're all united in the one goal, which is to oppose the legalisation of euthanasia and assisted suicide. We're an advocacy. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
We're an advocacy group, so we do lobby politicians. We'll provide them with information, with statistics. We also perform an educative role in that there are many, many misconceptions out there about what is and isn't legal already in terms of end of life when people are facing those big decisions.
Yeah, that's right. I remember in my days as a lobbyist talking to a very prominent Labor Party politician, and she said, euthanasia is already happening. And I said, what's already happening? And she said, doctors are giving people extra dosages of morphine that hastens death. And I said, that's not euthanasia. And I could see the blood drop from her face. That's a common misconception, isn't it, Branca?
It sure is. I guess our aim is to get behind that sanitised language more and more, because doctors killing their patients doesn't sound very attractive or appealing. The euthanasia proponents have changed their language so that it's very, very sanitised. Assisted dying, dying with dignity. All of these are slogans which are masking what's actually being approved, which is removing that long-standing prohibition on doctors killing their patients, which we've had in place for a very long time and for very good reason.
Yeah. Branca, I know I'm diverting a little bit from the questions that I sent you before we came on air tonight, but I know you're across this stuff, and just as you've been talking, thoughts are coming to my mind. But you and I both know from following the various parliamentary inquiries that have happened in recent years that palliative care experts are very clear that where proper end-of-life care is offered to patients, the requests for a lethal jab, for euthanasia to have their lives ended early, actually evaporate, don't they?
That's exactly right. And I think it was during the Victorian debate, palliative care doctors got together and wrote a letter to the politicians. In their experience, it's a very, very small number of people that cannot have their pain alleviated. Very, very small. Now, the stories we see during the campaigns are very harrowing, and it's hard to know what's gone on and the bigger context of what's happened there. But palliative care specialists speak all the time about the fact that when somebody expresses the wish to die, their job is to look beyond that request to see what's actually driving that. Is it that they're scared of pain and they don't know what options are available to them? Is it that they are scared of dying and haven't reconciled with children? Is it that they are isolated? Is it that they don't have money for healthcare? Palliative care specialists, it's a very specialised field, and they are really expert at looking at what's going on when someone does find themselves with a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah, that's right. And this is such a complex issue, and it's so easy to get caught up in the emotion of it. None of us would deny that some people do suffer bad deaths, and sadly, probably a lot of people have, and a lot of people have experienced with relatives suffering bad deaths, but that's not a case for a lethal jab being the answer. That's all the more reason why we've got to lobby for better end-of-life care, because we know that care is possible. We have the technology, we have the ability to provide that care. We just haven't got the will or perhaps the funding and just the drive to make that happen.
Yes, and can I also say that there's been a lot of misinformation, I think, spread by pro-euthanasia advocates who undermine the work of palliative care physicians, who are such dedicated professionals who are working every day in this area. And I think their advocacy does a disservice to the incredible work of so many doctors and nurses and professionals. Yeah,
absolutely. It's really hard when we're up against people like Andrew Denton, who, you and I have both heard him speak. I remember hearing him at the National Press Club a few years ago, where he said euthanasia is working fine in places like Belgium and Holland and Canada and Oregon. There's just only a handful of jurisdictions around the world that have crossed this threshold. But he's such a celebrity and so persuasive. I just couldn't believe the Canberra Press Gallery just swallowed his propaganda. He got asked no hard questions. And this is what I want to come to today, because once you look a little bit below the surface, you realise that this is not what the Andrew Dettons of this world are telling us. And the latest to come out of Holland, and you've written about this on the Hope website, but they were one of the first jurisdictions in the world to legalise euthanasia. But now the proponents who tell us that there's no slippery slope, that this is only ever going to be used for people who are terminally ill and in intractable pain, and there'll be safeguards, whatever, and it's scaremongering when people like you and I say there's a slippery slope. But in Holland now, it seems like they're putting grease on the slope. Tell us about the latest development coming out of Holland.
It's actually really concerning, Lyle. So they've had euthanasia legal now for about 20 years, maybe a little bit more. And as with every jurisdiction, it starts off with the extreme cases, strict safeguards. It only applies to sort of people who are terminally ill. 20 years on, there's been a private member's bill submitted to the Parliament in the Netherlands, which would extend their euthanasia regime to allow for what they call completed life euthanasia. Now, what that would be is people who are over 75, they don't need to have a terminal illness, they don't need to be in pain, they don't need to be suffering, they just need to have a persistent wish to die. That would be it. And they've been debating this concept for a few years now. It used to be called suicide, but they are seriously debating this for their society. That is how far they've come, even in terms of the desensitising of the public to death on demand.
So over 70, my dad turned 75 just 2 weeks ago. Now, he's obviously fit and well and healthy, but he's been through periods of his life where he's, had his ups and downs and felt depression. I think, all of us who are honest would say we've had those times in our life. If you're over 75 and we're feeling a bit depressed about life, this could then become sort of an attractive option. I've had a completed life. I'm going to toddle off. But it's so selfish, because where does that leave the rest of your loved ones and your family?
Yeah, and are you putting a burden on your family because you're not choosing to die?
That's right. Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of pressure placed on a lot of people, and there already is in the Netherlands. We know in Belgium, there's anecdotal stories of people carrying around cards with them that say, "Please don't euthanize me."
That's horrendous. Carrying around cards saying, "Please don't use." So this has struck fear into the hearts of many elderly and vulnerable people.
And it changes fundamentally the doctor-patient relationship. That should be one of absolute trust.
It's just amazing, Branca, that you've got a parliamentarian in the Netherlands putting up a bill to allow euthanasia to be accessed for a completed life, as you say, suicide on demand. Why aren't we hearing about that in the media here? I mean, euthanasia is an active debate in Australia, in states like Queensland and WA. Why don't the media tell us that this is a slippery slope?
I think there's a lot of effort put into putting the best possible light on euthanasia, especially as different parliaments are debating it. There was many activists last year during the Western Australian campaign that just denied that any of these things were happening. Yeah. I think to get things through Parliament, you have to convince politicians that it's a very, very narrow focus, very strict regime, to then to give coverage to completed life euthanasia like this. Just lays bare exactly where this is all headed.
Yeah, that's right. Branca, our time's almost gone, but look, I was shocked would have been 5 or 6 years ago to see a headline in the Washington Post newspaper, which is a very left-wing newspaper. Donald Trump would call it fake news, but a prestigious newspaper by world standards. Even they were shocked that in Belgium, it's now routine to euthanize the mentally ill. And yet we're told there's no slippery slope to this.
Well, and in Belgium, children can be euthanized.
Yeah.
People with gender dysphoria, people with anorexia, victims of sexual abuse. I mean, it's beyond the slippery slope. It's too horrific, really, to think about.
Our media are doing us a terrible disservice. I'm sure, like me, many friends. I have friends, even people of Christian faith, who are partial towards euthanasia because they have, no one wants to see anyone suffer, and they think the only way to have a good death is to avoid suffering, or that suffering can't be ameliorated through quality palliative care. So people, even, as I say, conservatives and even some Christians, support the idea of euthanasia. We've got a big job to educate even our friends, let alone the wider population.
Yep. And good deaths don't make really good media coverage. So
no, that's right. Yeah. Well, Branca, good on you for what you and Hope are doing. And look, thank you so much for shining a light on this horrendous idea of a completed death that's being discussed in Holland. And let's just hope that finds its way into the debate here in Australia. So Branca Vanderlinden from Hope, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Lyle. Great to be here.
Well, that's it for the Lyle Shelton Show for this week. Don't forget to go to lyleshelton.com.au and order your copy of my book, I Kid You Not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture Wars. Also, for those who are praying people, please pray for me tomorrow, Thursday, August 13. I'm being forced against my will to appear before the Queensland Human Rights Commission to defend myself against allegations of vilification and discrimination brought against me by two drag queens under the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1991. These drag queens have objected to my blog post in January, where I said that they were dangerous role models for children after the Brisbane City Council allowed them to read to very young children, in a public library. Their legal action against me is a brazen attempt to muzzle free speech so that they can be free to continue to indoctrinate children into dangerous rainbow ideology. I'll let you know how I go. On that note, that's it from me from this week. Thanks for joining me, and don't forget to tune in next week for another edition of The Lyle Shelton Show.
The Lyle Shelton Show is a production of The Good Source, hosted by Lyle Shelton. To watch, listen to, or read more content without the SJW PC fact filter, visit goodsource.news. Good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Source supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.